Welcome, everybody. Good morning, and thank you for coming. My name is Jatrice Martell Gator, and I am the proud, very proud daughter of an Army colonel. And yay for the RK. And I am Executive Vice President of Volunteers of America. Today, we hope to illuminate some of the most urgent problems affecting our nation's women's veterans and identify solutions and partnerships that can address these problems of this rapidly growing group. This discussion is the third part of a 3-year conversation we have been having to bring to light the issues that our veterans are facing after they come back home from serving our country and serving us. We have fought 2 wars over the past decade, and the VA reports that 55% of all veterans are returning with some degree of PTSD. The VA can't do it alone, nonprofits can't do it alone, corporations can't do it alone. We all have to work together to help these heroes who have helped us. That's why we are having this discussion today and why we are working on veterans issues. Now, Volunteers of America was founded in 1896, and the first veterans that we served were from the Civil War. We have been at this for a long time. We provide services to more veterans than any other nonprofit in the United States. This includes more than 10,000 veterans and their families. They are all in programs specifically designed to meet their needs, and these services include employment assistance, mental health counseling, peer-to-peer support, and affordable housing. But this is just a fraction of the 58,000 veterans who are homeless on almost any given night. That is outrageous. We all have to work together to do something. Approximately 10% of the veterans that Volunteers of America serves are now women. A decade ago, it was a small fraction. But we have been working to implement and innovate programs specifically designed to meet the needs of women. Our support helps veterans to overcome the barriers that stand between them and a stable, secure life, helping them to achieve well-being. Many of our programs help vets deal with issues such as PTSD, mental illness, and addictions. We make sure to help veterans connect with the benefits to which they are entitled, and we make use of the strong bonds forged between veterans with mentoring and peer-to-peer support networks. I would like to take a moment to thank the Home Depot today. The Home Depot has been a tremendous partner to Volunteers of America during the past several years and provides generous funding to help us build and repair homes across the country for thousands of veterans in the United States. The foundation has shown an incredible commitment to veterans, the veterans that work there and the veterans who live throughout our country. And we are so proud to partner with the Home Depot. This morning, I get to welcome Elisa Baseknight. She is the director of the VA's Center for Women Veterans, who since being appointed on October 1st, 2013, has dedicated herself to helping other women who have served our country. Even though she's only been in this role for 1 year, she has already demonstrated that she is absolutely driven to make a difference in her role as the primary advisor to the VA Secretary on programs and issues related to women veterans. Director Baseknight graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in 1991, making her the first African-American woman to graduate from West Point from the state of Wisconsin. She is an attorney, and she holds a Master's of Public Policy. As a newly commissioned military intelligence officer, Director Baseknight completed airborne school and other trainings and received a Joint Chiefs of Staff appointment. She has served both overseas and in the United States on active duty in the U.S. Army and in the U.S. Army Reserves. So what do you do in your spare time? Okay. Director Bass Knight serves as ex officio member on the Defense Advisory Committee on Women's in the Services and serves as the director's representative on the White House Council on Women and Girls. We are so honored to have this incredible woman, this incredible veteran, and this incredible public servant, Alisa Bass Knight.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Shinseki, Mrs. Riojas, Lisa Pape, all other distinguished guests. I just want to say it is truly a wonderful day to be able to be here, and thank you, Jatrice, for that very warm and kind introduction, and thank you to Volunteers of America for making today's event possible. I just have to say that I'm truly honored to be able to join today's discussion, a very timely conversation that we're here to have on After the Uniform, which is focused on our women veterans. Let me pause here for a moment. I think it's so important that we recognize the women veterans who are here in our presence today. So with that said, would all the women veterans here please raise your hands and raise them high? Thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you. Please know that I come to work each and every day motivated to make a difference for all of you, our extraordinary women veterans whose service spans multiple generations of war and peace. You are truly an extraordinary force, and I just want you to know that you all inspire me. So throughout my personal and professional journey, I have truly been, I'd say, motivated by a consistent life philosophy for me, which is maximize potential. And Volunteers of America did ask for me to share a few personal and professional remarks before we hear from our esteemed panel members. So as we survey the landscape of women veterans today and the myriad issues and challenges that they may experience, we all need to think about how we as a nation, communities, companies, nonprofits, and governments can truly help our women veterans maximize their potential. Expanding on what the President said in his most recent State of the Union address, I say that when women veterans succeed, America will undoubtedly succeed. Today, there are over 2.2 million women veterans in our country. That represents around 10.4% of our veterans population. Women comprise one of the fastest growing segments in our veterans population, are estimated that by 2020 will make up around 12.4% of our veterans population. Our women veterans hail from all walks of life and represent diverse national origins, ages, abilities, religions. These women are role models, our grandmothers, mothers, sisters, wives, daughters, and heads of households. They have played a huge part in our country's history, and their efforts will have lasting implication on our future as they chip away at the barriers that we see and often emerge as a result of things going on. They're successful leaders, mentors, accomplishing seemingly insurmountable missions and surviving with resolute resilience. And yes, I say resilience, sometimes against great odds. When these women surrender their uniform, they keep the intangible with them, the unbeatable skills that they will use in corporate boardrooms, perhaps transfer to the non-public private sector, or even cross into an enterprising entrepreneur. However, the transition after the uniform is not always easy. There are key concerns that persist for our women veterans population, such as homelessness, family housing, mental health, effects of military sexual trauma, which we must address in order to ensure that our women veterans maximize their potential. According to the 2014 Schreier Report, which focuses on poverty and the issues of women and children in America, 1 in 3 adult women live in poverty or on the brink of it. Housing costs are 10 to 25% of family budgets. 70 million women and children live paycheck to paycheck, and 47% of the workforce is female. However, 62% of the minimum wage jobs are held by women. Unfortunately, This is the reality that our women veterans potentially face after the uniform if they do not have a successful transition. So allow me to share my own personal military experience to illustrate the complexity of transitioning after the uniform. In 1995, I left the active Army Corps and went into the Army Reserves as a result of a serious service-connected injury. Shortly thereafter, my then new military husband got new orders. They come in. We were assigned to Fort Campbell. I remember that day after the wedding, getting in a U-Haul and driving down to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. That was the honeymoon. And so there were very few companies in this small town located near Fort Campbell. Potential employers considered me overqualified for most of the opportunities that were in this community. They didn't know where to place someone like me who possessed skills I acquired in the military. So I had to always ask myself, where do I fit in? I was educated, I had high quality work experience. I was 26 years old, I was used to leading organizations, but I was not ready to give up. So I ended up temping at a local bank, and I was the assistant to the administrative assistant. Indeed, I didn't know that job description existed. But I knew that I had the ability to be one of the organizational managers, but the only need at that time was for that particular role. I was determined to find my place in the workforce and took the bank position as an interim step. The Army taught me that everyone in an organization has a role. It's teams that accomplish a mission, not individuals. And so eventually, I found and was offered a fantastic position to design and lead an innovative career resource center for downsized U.S. military service members. 1990s, going through some transformational issues with our military at that point. To this day, my transition after the uniform was one of the most transformative and rewarding experiences in my life because I gained insight on how I could serve our service members, veterans, and their families and make their lives better. After all, I could certainly relate to the challenges of being uniquely skilled and no longer able to remain in a career field that I had originally planned for, trying to find my place in the civilian workforce. Now, almost 20 years later, it is truly an honor to serve as the director of the Center for Women Veterans. The center, established in 1994 pursuant to Public Law 103-446, monitors and coordinates the programs and services for women veterans, serves as an advocate for cultural transformation both within VA and within the general public. And I pause here briefly to say, think about this. When we see a man, perhaps short haircut, military lanyard, good posture, what comes to mind? You're thinking, he's probably a military veteran. But when we see a woman, military veteran is not usually the first thing that comes to mind. So what I and other experts, they call this unconscious bias. We must make sure that for cultural transformation, we encourage organizations and the public to consider women veterans when they outreach to veterans, when they think about and start and implement new programs. I ask all of us here today to keep this in mind moving forward. The center is also charged with raising awareness on the responsibility to treat women veterans with dignity and respect. Yes, even in 2014, I need to make this point. VA realizes that collaboration is key to our success in meeting the needs of women veterans. Our department-wide Women Veterans Program, which was established in 2013, is the nexus for enhancing access to our services and the driver of our initiatives. The Center for Women Veterans is leading a collaborative VA-wide homeless initiative, working with our wonderful partners, Lisa Pape, who's at the helm of this, in an effort to prevent homelessness among our women veterans by empowering them to improve their well-being and their economic security. On February 27, 2014, we actually kicked off a working group under the auspices of the White House Council on Women and Girls, focusing on women veterans' homelessness and other subject matters impacting our women veterans. The group is comprised of representatives from VA, other federal agencies, as well as the White House. And one very key and persistent challenge that informs our outreach strategies is that women veterans are often unaware of their veteran status. And this is evident even in the younger generations of veterans. And when they do not self-identify, these veterans, they miss out on the VA's quality benefits and programs for which they may be entitled. So to improve our women veterans' access to information about VA, we continue to strive to enhance our marketing presence on the web, in print, in social media, in public service announcements, and realizing that social media's effectiveness is quite effective with our women veterans, this past March, we hosted our first ever VA-wide Twitter town hall. Yes, I learned how to tweet. And further, the Center for Women Veterans zealously liaisons with other partners, our federal, our state, our nonprofit, local, and other partners to build understandings and how we can collaborate and work together. Perfect example, me being able to join you all today. VA has made significant progress in serving our women veterans and remains committed to improving benefits and services for our women's evolving needs. Just in 2013 alone, VA supported unprecedented numbers of women veterans with compensation benefits distributed to more than 329,000, education benefits to 122,000, and $1.9 billion in home loan guarantee benefits to 33,000. Last year, VA initiated the Women Veterans Hotline, 1-855-VA-WOMAN, please remember that, to address questions from our women veterans, their families, and caregivers in regard to VA's offered services and programs. Let's keep in mind that today's panel topics are so important for our women veterans, but there are also real-life other issues that women veterans require that we won't have time to discuss today. So hopefully today's event will inspire partners such as VOA and others here today to continue to expand on the diverse subject matters our women veterans, our nation's veterans, and families face that will affect their well-being and economic security. Funding for business ventures, exploring STEM career and opportunities, rural issues, entrepreneurship, employment, public service, mentoring. These are all topics we'd love to hold future conversations on. So allow me to close with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He said that faith is taking that first step, even when you don't know there is a staircase. So in the context of this quote, I ask that we all step out together. We can create, I believe, an end state for our women veterans to empower themselves, to make informed decisions, to maximize their potential, to be competitive in the 21st century, and to continue to be positive contributors in their community. Thank you for allowing me this time, and thank you, panel.
Thank you, Director Bass-Knight. Cultural transformation for women veterans. We have to remember that term. Excellent, thank you. Now, before we get started, I'd like to point out your lovely Volunteers of America notepads on all of your seats. We will use those for you to write your questions on. Please write your questions during the panel and then hand them to the ushers who will be on the side. Ushers, please vigorously raise your hand so people will see who you are. They are right there, so they'll be walking up around because we want to make sure that we get time to answer your questions later on. Now I'd like to introduce Gwen Ifill. She is our moderator this morning. Gwen Ifill is the moderator and managing editor of the Washington Week and co-anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour. Ms. Ifill has covered 7 presidential campaigns. I told her she's not old enough to cover 7 presidential campaigns. During the 2008 campaign season, she won a Peabody Award, which is one of the highest awards in her field. She's also moderated 2 vice presidential debates in 2004 and 2008. A best-selling author, Ms. Ifill wrote The Breakthrough: Politics and Race in the Age of Obama. She's received more than 20 honorary doctorates and has been honored for her work by the Radio and Television News Directors Association. And Ebony Magazine named her one of the 150 most influential African Americans. Before joining PBS, Ms. Ifill worked for 5 years as chief congressional and political correspondent at the NBC News. She joined NBC from the New York Times, where she covered the White House and politics, and she also worked for the Washington Post. Now, Ms. Ifill is absolutely no stranger to a lively debate, and that's what we hope, that we will have a lively discussion today. We're not going to debate what women veterans need. We're going to talk about how to get it to them and how to build resources to support them. Ms. Ifill.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here with you this morning. I think it's going to be a learning experience for everyone. We've assembled an amazing panel. But first, a couple of details that you have heard. You've heard there are going to be questions later. So really think as we're going along about the really smartest questions, because if they come to me and they're not smart, I'm not going to ask them. I'm just saying. So no pressure. Just try to step up your game. And the other part is that's the part we're really looking forward to, because I have a lot of questions of my own, and we're going to talk for a while among ourselves. But I'm also really very curious about what you bring to the conversation. Think about the numbers. 12% of women make up 12% of the veterans population, and that will grow to nearly 20% by 2040. Whatever issues there are, they're not going away. So we're going to talk about the problems that women in particular face, how traditional solutions work and how they fall short, what the challenges are that remain, how they're different from men. Some are the same: homelessness, substance abuse, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, but also women have those problems also, plus dealing with military sexual trauma and child-rearing responsibilities, the garden variety stuff that all women have to deal with. And yet, along the way, budget cuts complicate the search for solutions. So we're going to talk about all of that. But first, I want to introduce you to our panel. To my immediate left is Kimberly Dozier. She recently took on the role as contributing writer for the Daily Beast. She just came back from 3 weeks in Afghanistan, so watch for those stories. She worked as an Associated Press correspondent for several years, and occasionally she would do me the favor of joining me around the Washington Week table. She was wounded in a car bombing while covering a story in Iraq in 2006 while working for CBS News. Her fellow reporters, as well as an Army captain and an Iraqi translator, were killed in that car bombing. She recounts that story and her journey back in breathing the fire, fighting to report and survive the war in Iraq. She endured multiple surgeries after that to get herself back on her feet, and then returned to her job at CBS News. At that point, I would have rethought my career options, but that's me. And after working at CBS for a while, she made an unusual decision. She went back to print to work for the Associated Press. And as a result, over her career, she's won multiple awards, including in 2009 the Sigma Delta Chi Journalism Award, a 2008 Peabody Award, 2 Edward R. Murrow Awards. So she knows a lot, she's seen a lot, and she's going to tell us a lot. Next to her, on her left, is Dr. Jonathan Sharon. He's Executive Vice President of Military Communities, and he's the Chief Medical Officer for Volunteers of America. He has guided the expansion and innovation of veterans programs throughout Volunteer of America's national network, and he also provides leadership to build stronger relationships with government agencies and establish new sources of funding. He is a leading authority on the treatment of veterans suffering from mental health problems and facing reintegration challenges. At the VA, where he served for more than a decade as a clinician, teacher, researcher, and administrative leader, his last post was Chief of Mental Health for the Miami VA system and professor and vice chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Miami. On his left is Heather Pritchard. She's the senior manager of national partnerships for the Home Depot Foundation. Home Depot Foundation's mission is to ensure that every veteran has a safe place to call home. They've committed $80 million to that mission over 5 years. And more than 40 Volunteers of America Veterans Housing. They have made grants to more than 40 Volunteers of America Veterans Housing programs in 16 states, more than $5 million, and have transformed more than 10,000 homes for veterans. And finally, at the end of last but not least, as we like to say, is Dr. Susan McCutcheon. She's National Mental Health Director of Family Services, Women's Mental Health, and Military Sexual Trauma for Mental Health Services at the Department of Veterans Affairs. VA Mental Health Services defines the vision of mental health care for the Veterans Administration. Previously, she was Director for Community Mental Health at the Cleveland VA Medical Center in Ohio and began her career with the Veterans Health Administration in 1983. Now you know who they are. Let's talk about what the questions are they have to face. And I want to start with you, Dr. McCutcheon. How would you define the key? Yes, I got to you last, but I come to you first. How would you define the key problems?
Well, certainly as mentioned previously, that women veterans are the fastest growing segment seeking services at VA healthcare systems. Between 2005 and 2013, there was an increase of 68% of women seeking services. And this is even more astounding when you look at the women seeking mental health services. And I think our previous speakers have talked about mental health. And between the same time period of 2005 to 2013, there's been an increase of 121% of women seeking mental health services. So clearly the landscape at the VA has really changed. And certainly, as Gwen had mentioned, I started in 1983. And so I've seen tremendous changes within the VA system. And they have been positive, great changes. The first thing that VA is committed to doing is really providing gender-sensitive mental health care. And what I mean by that is that there's some key components to gender-sensitive mental health care. The first is comprehensiveness. We have a continuum of mental health care that starts with general mental health care, which is frequently found in our primary care health clinics, sometimes in women's only primary care health clinics. We also have specialty mental health care. I think some of our earlier speakers talked about post-traumatic stress disorder. We also have residential programs and inpatient units for our women veterans who need that intense of an intervention. We also have choice in modality. For group interventions, we have women-only, gender-specific interventions. We also have mixed gender options for them. And really, both types have their advantages. Some women do prefer women only. They feel more safe, secure for their types of treatment. But in a mixed gender setting, they may have opportunities to confront some of their early fears and really have a positive experience that will help them as they go into the community where the community is a mixed gender setting. We also focus on competency of providers. The mental health services have made a great commitment in providing education and training to our clinicians to be sure that they're really aware and trained on the uniqueness of treating women veterans. And also innovations of creative options. Many, especially of our smaller VA medical centers, it may be the situation where there would be only one female in a male group, let's say in addictions treatment. And so we do provide policy where that woman would then have an opportunity to have individual treatments. So there's some things that wouldn't be appropriate to discuss in a group of men, but certainly there are some psychoeducational types of education that would be appropriate in a mixed gender. We've recently done a survey, of best practices, which all of our medical centers have provided. We also do a monthly educational program just focused on for providers for women's mental health. We've newly stood up a reproductive mental health steering committee. And with that committee, we have developed a curriculum that we're piloting. And this type of curriculum will address such issues as the effects of pregnancy and postpartum on women's mental health issues, the use of psychotropic medications on the maternal health and fetal health. And I can talk about this a little bit later, too.
Yes. Yes, I'm actually going to ask everybody to give us a little thumbnail sketch and just go down the
sorry.
list. That's okay. No, it's
Get carried away when I talk about the VA.
No, it's okay. Heather Pritchard, Home Depot Foundation has chosen to focus on the housing issues facing veterans in general, but women veterans benefit in particular?
Absolutely, and I think the challenges that we've seen across the country really, and I know this isn't a surprise to anyone in the room, but it's a lack of adequate housing for our women veterans. We see more housing for male veterans just because typically there have been, and historically there have been more male veterans. So the lack of housing for women veterans is something that we've really been focused on, especially over the past year. I think it was mentioned earlier, but women veterans tend to not self-identify as veterans, so that makes it a lot harder for our veteran service organizations to match the benefits to the women veterans. So that's another challenge that we've seen. Lack of coordination among veteran service organizations. We know that that's gotten better over the past couple of years, but it's an area where we can still continue to improve. And then one of the things that we've found interesting, not in a good way, that we've run up against in certain cities are these asinine laws that have been there for years. One of them is a brothel.
Tell us what you really think.
Tell us. I'm not opinionated at all. But we've run up against, in a couple of cities, some laws that have really hindered us from development of projects, such as a brothel law. So we're in certain cities and we're told that women, a certain number of women cannot live together. It's one thing, you know, we talk about this in areas and we've got women who are in sororities who say, oh, that happens to us all the time, we can't live in our sorority house. Well, it's one thing when you can't live in your sorority house, but it's another thing when it keeps you from having a home because of this law. So those are some of the things that we've come up against. And what have we done? We work with our veteran service organizations. We've got great relationships and great partnerships with Community Solutions and a partnership that they have with the VA. We are also working to create and identify more housing. And as Gwen said earlier, we have committed $80 million over 5 years. We're about $68 million into that, and we've got less than a year and a half to go. So we're always looking for more projects, so if you've got them, please bring them to us.
That's great. I want to hear about the cities with the brothel laws later. Or maybe now, no, later. We'll come back to it. Dr. Sharon, so many of the questions and the challenges facing veterans in general will have to do with mental health issues. But explain to us why, for women, this is a specific targeted area that we need to pay more attention to.
Well, the issues that face female veterans in many ways are unique and need to be dealt with in a very tailored manner. For one thing, as Dr. McCutcheon mentioned, there's a real importance to have to be culturally competent as a provider, in addition to provide an environment that is safe and secure. In many situations, this is not an opportunity for a mental health provider to get aggressive and try and implement treatment interventions in a short period of time. It takes a long time, in many cases, to develop adequate rapport. There are a number of movements in the field, seeking safety, trauma-informed care, which are really critical to delivering the right type of services to female veterans. And one of the things that is very important, I think, in the partnerships that you're developing between the community and the VA, is to recognize that some veterans in general, and certainly some female veterans, are reluctant to engage with the VA at the outset. And that's not necessarily a situation where the VA can't be involved, but it may take time. And by engaging with an organization like Volunteers of America and many other fantastic nonprofits, it can lead towards a more trusting relationship over time with governmental agencies and certainly with the VA, which has a massive, massive crew of highly trained professionals in the mental health field.
Kimberly, give us the reporter's view from the front lines, as it were, on these issues. You've spent a lot of time in the field, and you've spent a lot of time talking to active and retired military, and not only about these issues, but about issues in general. So how would you prioritize it?
Well, I'm in the bizarre and unique position of having had an experience running parallel to a lot of the folks in uniform, especially the women in uniform who happen to have been injured. I was, as a CBS News correspondent, very badly injured. And in my recovery process, I ran smack into the same sort of barriers that women in uniform or all veterans in uniform run into when they come back to the civilian population. So I want to pose the provocative question. We've said in this panel a lot of women don't self-identify as veterans. Well, what's the upside? Because what I found was when people recognized me as, oh, that CBS News correspondent who was injured, they immediately thought of me as broken. Really? They thought of me as a walking PTSD time bomb. If I didn't have it, I would. The fact that I talked about having post-traumatic stress for 3 weeks in the hospital, just the fact that I said those words, the audience would almost sometimes shut off and make an instant assumption, oh, she has PTSD. I went into this long I used to go into this little kind of soliloquy, this 15-minute explanation of, for 3 weeks in the hospital, I had nightmares, hypervigilance, flashbacks. I could feel the bombing. I had hallucinations about demons carrying away Paul Douglas and James Brolin, my camera crew who were killed that day. And I said, but then I insisted on talking to a psychologist in the hospital. Even though some of my neurosurgeons are like, oh, you've got a brain injury, don't do that right now. My symptoms went away, and the larger, harder part to deal with was survivor's grief from losing my colleagues, and then the sort of reaction, my anger over the reaction of the public when I got back to work. Do you know, most audiences, like, people would then ask me afterwards, they'd walk up to me, so tell us more about your PTSD. And I'd be like, ah! You know, I really, weren't you listening? So when I talk to other women veterans and they say, yeah, same thing. They don't want to go for help. They don't want to self-identify because except in a very small group of people, DC, a national security center, or certain parts of the states, which are very sort of military focused or military supportive, in a lot of other places, it's almost as if admitting to having a problem. So that if you then admit to having a problem on top of the perceived problem, it shackles you, it holds you back from succeeding. I found I had to leave my previous job with a great bunch of people, but they couldn't stop seeing me through that lens. I had to sort of remake my whole career, and now every once in a while I'll remind people, like in a setting like this, oh, remember I was that, you know, that bomb chick. The New York, the Post called me Bomb Girl.
Bomb Girl.
Bomb Girl, yeah. I some Navy SEAL friends call me Bomb Babe. I like that much better.
I like Bomb Babe. That's good.
So that is my experience, and that's because I'm a loudmouth. That's what I hope to talk about here.
I'm curious about how many military women we have in the audience and whether they identify with what Kim was just talking about with being, show of hands is fine, being treated as less than because of your experience.
I heard a murmur a couple of times.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Instead of more than. Because in fact, when we do the perfunctory thank you for your service thing in airports, you know, you get it a lot and you go, yeah, whatever, thank you, right? What are you supposed to say to that, by the way? I don't know. You're welcome. But when you get through that, then people decide they're going to slap labels on who you are. So here's our first challenge. We're going to walk through the challenges for women, but I want whoever wants to speak up first, but how do you speak to that challenge? The veteran who comes back, who served her country, and unlike probably in many respects the way men are treated, have to overcome the labels which are slapped on her so much that she doesn't want to self-identify as a veteran. Dr. McCutcheon.
You know, everybody just kind of turned towards
me.
Well, you know, certainly the good news is that of our most recent veterans, the OEF, OIF, OND veterans, over 60% of the women are coming to VA services, and a good portion of those individuals have issues with mental health concerns. So those people who do have mental health concerns and want to seek treatment and get help and recover do come to the VA. So those are our good news. And we do have a lot of outreach efforts for those who have looked at the web and seen such things like Make the Connection, where there's actual testimonies of women who have struggled and who are on their way to recovery. In our National Center for PTSD, we also have something similar that also shows women who have PTSD, and they talk about those struggles and recovery. So for those women who are looking for health care, and that's what the VA is about, it's providing excellent health care for those in need, then we are supporting our women in increasing numbers, and more are coming for mental health services. And so we try to provide these outreach where people know that they're not alone. And when we see some of the stories, some of them say that in, let's say, a gender-specific setting, the opportunity to talk to women who've had similar struggles that has been, you know, very beneficial for them to find these women. So for VA healthcare, for those women who are looking for services, we provide that for them.
Dr. Sharon, do you find that when it comes to counseling women, not only just with specific medical issues and concerns, but just in general for reintegration into society, that this is something you have to tackle first?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think it raises a really massive issue, and that you know, some people talk about the military-civilian divide. You know, the women warriors who return to our country need a place where they can be what they are, which is civic assets and leaders. Yeah, these are courageous, resilient people who have defended our country. And in terms of needs, we need them. And we need to recognize that, and that narrative needs to become really a part of our fabric. Because it's at that level, I think, that things trickle down and make it an easier place to get care. At Volunteers of America and other organizations that have a broad set of services to multiple populations, not just veterans, we have the advantage because we have female veterans who actually come, but they don't come to programs that are specifically for veterans. They come for any number of things, whether it may even be for their children. But over time, as we get to know them and engage, we can help them you know, recognize and become proud of their service and engage some of the resources that have been made available to them because of what they've done for our country. One of the things that we're doing at several sites in our country, in which in our network, which I'm trying to really grow, is a battle buddy program where female veterans working for us, either as employees or volunteers working alongside us, are reaching out to female veterans in the community who may be languishing. And that's a very powerful, powerful model. We also you know, do a lot of work through the internet and you know, outside of kind of the veteran space, trying to engage this population.
Richard, I was curious about something you said about having all these grants that you want to make and not having people lined up around the block, around the corner asking for it. Is that part of the self-identification issue? I mean, could you elaborate on that a bit? How could it be that there is this program to provide housing for women veterans that isn't being fully utilized?
I think that's twofold. I think that one, yes, it is a self-identification issue, but then also the need for women veteran housing is a lot newer. We've just seen an influx of women veterans who have become homeless over the last couple of years. And so it's just
the last few years.
Yes, just in the last few years. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. And so it's working with nonprofit organizations that have historically worked with housing and worked with veterans and helping them understand the need for the housing for women veterans. Volunteers of America has done a great job. We have, over the past 2 years, funded 33 projects with them, and those are all for women veterans. And I would say 14 of those are for permanent supportive housing and the rest are for transitional housing. So we're looking more for the permanent supportive housing projects for women veterans. And I do want to share one of my favorite success stories over the last year. It's actually with Habitat for Humanity International. We worked with a woman, Lydia Perez, and Lydia served her country, and she came home and she found herself the sole breadwinner, not only for herself and for her children, but also for her mother, her sister, and her sister's children. And we worked closely with Habitat for Humanity International to find a home for her. And now Lydia and her entire family have a safe place to call home. And so the work of our partners is just amazing. And we know that they know the need of women veterans and housing for them. And we're proud to partner with them.
Kim, I want to come back to you on another issue, which is in a lot of headlines and which we're all paying very close attention to, and that's the progress in this debate about military sexual assault or military sexual trauma, which obviously disproportionately affects women in the military and out of the military for years later. Tell me about your experience with how big a concern that is, how big a conversation that is outside of Washington.
Well, one of the ways that I just came across this issue was being in Afghanistan for 3 weeks, is seeing how the military is trying to tackle it now within the military, and trying to get people educated that this is unacceptable, and that they should report it if it happens. Now they're trying really hard. If you measure it in numbers of seminars soldiers told me they had to take, and the number of signs everywhere I went, whether it was in the showers and bathrooms at the Kabul IJC headquarters, or the Bagram base, or out in RC East in Jalalabad.
What do the signs say?
The signs say things like, you know, you're not alone, or this is unacceptable, and they have stern-faced men or women kind of staring out at you, and this is in the dining hall as you like check in and get your tray. And so I was sitting with a bunch of sergeants, and I said, so these signs everywhere, they're kind of ominous. I was feeling like I was a target. I hadn't even been thinking in this direction. And one of the guys is like, hey, it's not, the Army isn't serious about something unless it makes a sign or has a cake cutting. So we see these signs everywhere, and that means they're serious, and then we can tell the younger soldiers really, you know, they mean it. And I was like, yeah, okay, I get it, but as somebody who's been subject to sexual assault or harassment in my career, I feel like I need to hear about it in a different way. And then I started telling these 5 soldiers about a time early in my career when my boss was sexually harassing me, and all the different ways I had to take to combat it, especially when I found out from coworkers that my female boss had heard the same thing from the person who previously had my position and done nothing, and said, you got to manage it yourself. So I talked about how my then husband would come to work and sit next to me, and the guys, you know, when you turn people off in a conversation, this wasn't this. These 5 guys were like asking me questions like, what do we do? They wanted to be part of this, but they almost felt like helpless, going, how do we teach people that it's safe to come out and talk about it, and that it's not right to do, without sounding like here's another PowerPoint sign telling you what to do or not to do. So I saw that conversation happening out there, but it's at an early stage. Back here, I sense that it's something that we talk about a lot in DC, but not much outside.
Well, that's what I'm curious about, because I think there was a report a couple of weeks ago that showed that the numbers of reported cases of sexual assault had skyrocketed, but reports, not necessarily incidents. So I wonder, how do you separate that out when in acting on this, Dr. McCutcheon, and what you do about it, not only for the people who are the victims, but also for the people who don't even know what it is and what to do about it, the good guys and the bad guys, or women?
Well, certainly I can talk about the VA response to military sexual trauma. And actually, military sexual trauma is a term that's unique just to the VA. And it's defined as both sexual assault and sexual harassment that occurred while active duty or active duty for training. Because we do believe that assault and harassment really fall on a continuum of trauma. Every veteran who comes to the VA is screened for experiences of military sexual trauma. We ask 2 questions, one on sexual assault and one that addresses sexual harassment. And if a veteran answers yes to one or both of those questions.
What's the wording of the question?
I don't have the exact. I'm sorry. But it's certainly, while you were in the military, did anyone threaten to take force to have sex with you or corner you, or it actually gives examples of the 2 questions. And if the veteran answers yes to one or both of the questions, then they're immediately asked if they would like to have a referral for healthcare services. If you've screened positive for experiences of military sexual trauma, all of your healthcare and pharmaceuticals are free. That includes physical health care, mental health care, and your pharmaceuticals. And so we have a different situation than the Department of Defense, where I know, Gwen, you talked about reporting. At the VA, there's really no negative consequences to answering yes, because immediately you get free health care, you get access to mental health providers. Every VA medical center across the country has an MST coordinator who is there just to help coordinate the care. We have made a great commitment in evidence-based practices for our clinicians to study those. And so the most prevalent diagnosis for military sexual trauma is post-traumatic stress disorder. So at the VA, we offer the gold standard, which is prolonged exposure, cognitive processing therapy for our veterans. We have outpatient therapy at all of our VA medical centers. For those veterans that need more intense treatment, we have residential programs, inpatient programs. We have expansive eligibility, so a veteran may not be eligible for any other type of healthcare services, but if they've experienced some MST, they do get free healthcare for that issue. So there is no need to report it at the time of the incident. You do not need to be service connected. You do not have to have benefits to get free healthcare. And Gwen, there's a lot of confusion, I think, out there because there's been reports about people struggling with the benefits process, but you don't need to have reported, have any evidence, any of those things to get great health care at the VA for military sexual trauma. All you have to do is answer yes to one or both those questions. And there's no who was it, what time, were you drinking, none of those. Just yes to those two questions. If while you were in the military, you had experiences of sexual harassment, which were threatening, or sexual assault.
Well, can I ask a question about that? Which is
Absolutely.
It's kind of a reporter's question, which is, if that's true, if there doesn't have to be proof or anything to back up the claim,
yes.
Doesn't that lead to false reporting?
We don't believe that a veteran would falsely report that they had been sexually assaulted or sexually harassed. And really, they're there to get treatment for those experiences. MST in itself is not a diagnosis, so we see mostly that there's post-traumatic stress disorder associated with that, some depression, some addictions, or there's some physical disorders. There may be some genital urinary problems, or those kind of issues. But no, because the only advantage is to get good health care for that experience.
Dr. Sharon, we talk a lot about this issue lately, but how would you rank it among the top 5 concerns among the people you serve?
Military sexual trauma in particular?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's one of the biggest issues in the population, and I certainly in the female veteran population. I don't mean to be avoiding your question, but I think there's something that we need to be thinking about as a nation, and that is, it's not really just about coming back as a veteran and what do you do. We need to be thinking really proactively about preparation for waging war, the process of waging a war, and then returning. This is a population that I guess it's probably in the mid-70s when we started to have an all-volunteer force that has grown dramatically. And there are other subpopulations that bring different that bring different needs, and we need to be thinking about that on the front side as our service members and the populations that make up our service in general are evolving and changing.
And when you say we, and I want to ask Heather this question, when you say we, does this mean a government response? Does it mean a private sector response? Does it mean a volunteer response? And I'm talking about not just, as Dr. Sharon said, not just when you come home, but also the whole process that we've now created by having a volunteer army or a volunteer military.
I would think that it's all of the above. I think that one of the things we've learned over the years in our foray into veteran housing is that peer support is absolutely critical. One of the things, and I know I keep taking it back to housing, but this is what we do.
That's why you're here.
That's right. That's why I'm here. I think one of the greatest examples that we've seen over the last couple of years, and John, you can talk to this too, is our Claremont Commons project in Denver, Colorado. We found that women veterans like to be housed together. They like to have that community together. And so the Denver Commons project is actually 3 homes that are located right next to each other. They are in a neighborhood, and the housing is actually for women veterans and women veterans with children. But what's great is they've got that network of peer support within these 3 homes, and they're actual beautiful, absolutely gorgeous homes. They've got that peer support there, but they're part of a larger community since they are in the neighborhood. Do you want to talk about those homes a little bit from your perspective?
Yeah, well, there's a good reason why it's not called the House Depot. It is the Home Depot, and what they are doing around this country, and I think leading the entire sector, is creating homes for service members. And These particular homes in Colorado, which I saw early on as a VOA staff, are really breathtaking. And when you go in and you spend time with the female veterans and their children who are there, is that it is a transformative opportunity for them. Because, you know, one of the things that happens when families and individuals are moved around and are deployed and then are returned is that their roots are constantly being ripped up. And one of the basic needs of a human being is kinship relations. You need family, you need friends. And through peer interactions, through environments like this one that you're referring to, there's a great opportunity for healing, because healing cannot occur in isolation.
I was just going to say, one of the toughest things that I've heard from many people returning here and deciding to get out of the military is that all of a sudden they lose their family. And they do lose that sense of kinship, and that access to somebody else who's been through the same sort of experiences, so that, I mean, you can be out shopping and then something will jog your memory and you can bring that up. I remember when I was a young foreign correspondent in Cairo, Egypt, the incidence of sexual harassment on the street was all of us, all the women experienced it every day, all the time. So get any group of women together, diplomats, aid workers, journalists, you know, for a book club. 15 minutes in, we'd start talking about whatever latest scandalous incident had just happened to us. Like the pregnant woman who got propositioned while standing next to her husband in Zamalek, which is a really upscale part of Cairo. And after they put the guy off, they asked their driver, why would he do that? And the driver was like, oh, well, you're pregnant, so he can tell you did it with another guy, so why not ask you? And just the fact that, like, so, but for all of us to hear that you know, that helped us to hear that. So it's to be able to share those kind of experiences. The other thing that has to happen, though, is back within the military, some generational norms just have to either retire out of the Army or retire out of the military, or enough people have to sit in settings like this and hear from people about, okay, how does this feel when someone says X? I've been privy to a couple of conversations among friends when they talked about Brigadier General Martin Schweitzer, who was caught in an email back and forth with General Sinclair, who was prosecuted for alleged rape of his, the officer who'd worked with him for years, the junior officer. So in this, he had, this Brigadier General had made a flippant but very crude remark about a lawmaker, a Tea Party lawmaker who'd visited their base. And the comment came up, and the senior officers I was around were like, it was just guy talk. But, you know, that was a group of senior officers, and they're like, yeah, well, why did everyone take that so seriously? That's gotta stop. And had I had a little bit more gumption at the time and hadn't been in, you know, sort of an interview setting, I would have said, whoa, no, totally not appropriate. And here's, yeah, when I read that, that made my skin crawl, and I wondered how many other officers have said something similar after I or another female journalist went to interview them. Did they put it on their official Army, you know, email account? So those kind of conversations, person to person, have to happen so that these attitudes change.
I'm going to ask the panel one more kind of big picture question. That if you have questions that you'd like to pass to our nice, our happy, wave your hands in the air people who will collect them, then the next questions will come from you. Here's my final question to the panel, from me anyway. Well, I don't promise. Unless something else occurs to me. Dr. McCutcheon, I want to start with you. I want each of you to talk about what you're doing and your mission and your role in this challenge that we have laid out here today, and tell me what more you could be doing. What are the challenges left unfulfilled in what you're doing, each of you?
Well, certainly my role as the National Mental Health Director for Family Services, Women's Mental Health, and Military Sexual Trauma is I'm focused on policy development, program development in these areas. I think we have a tremendous infrastructure to support the care for our women and men who've experienced military sexual trauma. I think the area of women's mental health is a newer area for us. We are gearing up to meet the challenge. We are providing a lot of educational opportunities for our clinicians so they know the unique needs of women veterans. We're putting programs together, training. We're getting into the area of reproductive mental health, which is something new for us, so that we can be sure that we're providing women with the best care possible during their whole life cycle, the reproductive life cycle, including menopause. I know there's a little more focus on pregnancy and postpartum, but also in menopause. Also, a new area is family services, and I know we alluded a little bit to the relational distress that our veterans are experiencing. And in the last few years, we've really developed this nice continuum of family services, of family education, family consultation, and most importantly, marriage and family counseling. Right now, there are 3 different models within the VA system. One is integrative behavioral couples therapy that addresses relational distress, behavioral couples therapy for those with addictions. We also have cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy for PTSD for those individuals. So we're really also focusing that how important it is for the family to mend as part of the recovery process. With all of these couples trainings, we make sure that there's knowledge given to the clinicians on assessing for domestic violence, because that's always important to know about when you're contemplating bringing a couple into therapy. We focus on parenting, and we also focus on the issue of same-sex couples, which is something that when you're doing marriage and family counseling, we just don't want to think narrowly of just a man and a woman, but we also, if there's the same genders, we want to also provide them with services. So I think there are some areas that are really well established, Gwen, but there's some areas that I think in the last 6 to 8 years we've just developed and grown to meet the needs of our new veterans coming in.
Do you have the resources to take all that on?
Do we? You know, what I can tell you about military sexual trauma, Congress had asked us to do a capacity report on a yearly basis and report to Congress. And the overwhelming majority of our facilities do have capacity to provide MST-related care. We do trainings every year on all of our models of families and couples therapy. And the area of women, you know, all of our clinicians are taking the trainings. And so we are really gearing up for providing these type of services for our veterans.
Heather Pritchard?
I know it's going to come as a big surprise that I mentioned housing. No. The mission of the Home Depot Foundation is to ensure every veteran has a safe place to call home. And I know you've heard it a couple of times now, but we have made that commitment of $80 million over 5 years to work towards that goal. So the housing piece of it and funding for housing is one of the largest things that we do. We're very fortunate to be very singularly focused on veteran housing because it's very important to us and to our associates. I think aside from that, we do a lot of convening. We want to make sure that we are pulling the right people together to have the conversation. So conversations such as this and working with Community Solutions and the VA and our work with 25 cities is another important aspect of what we do. And then I want to make sure that I mention our associate-led volunteer force, Team Depot. So when we partner with the community, when we partner with organizations, we don't want to put funds into an organization, invest in a development, and just walk away. We want to make sure that we're connecting the dots with the right organizations, but that also we're putting our volunteer force behind it. So we are 330,000 strong. We call it our Orange Army, and we do lots of projects in the communities, from doing landscaping, from building homes, doing critical repairs for senior veterans and women veterans and just veterans in need in general. Those are the big things that we're doing, and we are very fortunate to have the resources to back up all of those goals.
Dr. Sharon?
Yeah, well, you know, we take a real holistic approach to all of our clients and really are focused on promoting well-being, because it's with a state and a sense of well-being that human flourishing is possible. And through partnerships with organizations, you know, like the VA like Home Depot, with other nonprofits, we look to deal with an individual based on that person's needs, and in many times are able to capitalize on their strengths as well. So whether it's a relational kinship deficit that needs to be worked on, whether it is a housing environment, we have a number of programs across the country that we have specifically modified for female veterans. We have some programs, in fact, 2 of them have closed in the not too distant past, one in Chicago called Hope Manor 2, and one in Los Angeles called the Navy Village, or Blue Butterfly, that are specifically focusing on female veterans and their children. We want to make sure when we have a client that they are getting access to health care, that health care is comprehensive, that whether or not there's a primary PTSD or a primary military sexual trauma, perhaps they're having a pain syndrome, and that pain syndrome is actually related to a psychological issue. Maybe there's cognitive deficits that are interfering with certain functions. When we do case management, explore these different avenues. They're critical to overall well-being and the opportunity to flourish as a human being. We also, in our programs, help with education, training, and employment placement. We engage pro bono legal services on a regular basis to make sure that people are getting benefits, to make sure that issues like domestic violence are being dealt with. The divorce rate in this population is through the roof, so pro bono legal assistance is critical. And in the bigger picture, and this tends to go along with employment, but I think is much larger, purpose in life. With purpose in life, with a mission, individuals really can transform and become empowered. So we are doing a lot in each of those different arenas, and we are looking to expand that reach specifically for female veterans, particularly as the population grows, and particularly as the needs of this population begin to surface. The concept that someone comes back and is, that cross-section in time is suffering or is declaring that they're suffering is not accurate. And in fact, as we know from a lot of studies in the past decade, PTSD or any post-traumatic syndrome tends to evolve over years, not months, years, and sometimes decades. We need to be thinking about that with this population, especially because we don't know that much about this population, and we have a lot to learn as we go forward.
So picking up on that, I want to both find examples and be an example of resiliency, so that when people look at someone who's come out of the war zone, they don't automatically assume they're broken. Yes, PTSD can take a long time to develop, but I also believe that if you confront those issues early on, the majority of people end up more resilient for the process, for their experiences, wiser, the kind of people you want on your team. So that's why I stayed in the field. I didn't let injury drive me out of it. And that's also why I'm working on a book on resiliency and special operators and intelligence officers right now. And I want to find a story of a woman officer or two who has been out there through the thick of it, made some horrible calls, had some close calls, maybe lost members of her team, and has overcome that experience. Because until there are more examples out there like that, more examples in general of women veterans as thought leaders and leaders in the community, we're not going to change this conversation. So it's a long process, but it's going to be one person at a time reaching small groups of people like this.
Well, let's broaden the conversation, because I've got a lot of really great questions here, and we're not going to be able to get through them all, and some of them actually have been answered, so don't feel ignored if I feel like I've skipped over your question. But I'll just direct them to who can best answer them. This one is, how can we address the shortage of mental health professionals, especially as we're facing a shortage of primary care physicians and specialists? This will only get worse with the coverage expansion of the Affordable Care Act. Dr. McCutcheon.
Well, certainly with the VA system, we've had the good fortune and the funding to bring on numerous amounts of mental health providers over the last few years. And certainly, I think this, the issue of shortage of mental health providers is certainly in the community as well as, but within the VA, we've had the funding. We do make sure we monitor workload, various things like that. So VA has systems to ensure that we do have providers, trained providers to provide care for our individuals. Yeah.
I think, you know, based in part on the fact that there's reluctance among certain service members to engage in the government services, and the fact that it's an overwhelming need on the heels of a long period of conflict. There are organizations, and I believe Barbara Van Dalen's here, such as Given Hour, which have really stepped up to provide a significant amount of pro bono volunteer mental health services. There are a few. Given Hour, I believe, is the largest, and currently has a network somewhere around 6,000 to 8,000 mental health professionals who are providing mental health care specifically to post 9/11 veterans, males, females, as well as family.
Heather Pritchard, I'm looking for a housing question for you. So here's one. To add more housing for veterans in general, the VA has a program to provide underused VA land, often on hospital campuses, for supportive housing. Considering the PTSD stigma and fears women veterans may face, do we need a different approach to create safe women veteran housing locations affordably?
So I'm guessing that question refers to the enhanced use lease? Yes, no? Yes, all right. That has been, I think it's safe to say, an issue for us to fund those projects over the years. So the projects tend to get tied up and don't come to fruition as quickly as we would like to see them. So we have been working with organizations such as VOA and Operation Homefront and other organizations to find housing off of VA campuses. But what we do like to see is those housing projects, housing developments close to VA services. We won't fund a project unless there are services, wraparound services attached to the project. So the answer to the question is yes, let's look for projects outside of those enhanced use leases.
This question I'm going to ask Kim to take on, and also Dr. McCutcheon. How do female veterans, organizations, and service providers balance awareness and the risk, I can't read this word, of availability or something? A female veteran doesn't always have military sexual trauma and/or PTSD. A disabled veteran isn't always a result of combat. How do we address these issues without ostracizing those female veterans who don't fall in this demographic?
That's, I guess that simply boils down to honoring their service with services and reminding them that when they get out of the service, that they are still part of the family. So if you got your injury in a car crash back at Fort Bragg as opposed to overseas, I've run into some people like that, and it's true, they do sort of apologize. I didn't get hurt in a war zone. It was just back at Bragg. But I also found on some Wounded Warrior events that I went on with some of these folks that their fellow soldiers, the guys especially, because it's usually like 8 guys and 1 woman, remind that person, no, you belong here. So part of that is, you know, their fellow soldiers have to, you know, the leadership has to send the message that doesn't matter how you were injured in uniform.
And I think that the person who posed the question, you know, has a good point, because we do hear a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder and military sexual trauma, but the VA has a lot of general mental health services. So I'm assuming if someone's coming to the VA, they're coming for some kind of healthcare concerns. We have things like we work on communication skills. We have problem-solving interventions. And some of these things are actually housed in our general mental health clinics or our primary health clinics that have a co-located mental health provider, or our women's clinics who also have a co-located mental health provider. So we actually have a continuum of services. So a woman veteran who doesn't have necessarily PTSD or have experienced MST can get other services throughout this continuum.
Dr. McCutcheon, I have several questions for you, and I want to couple two of them together, if that's okay. One is, how will integration of women into the combat arms or branches of the military affect women's veterans? What steps are the VA and partner organizations taking to prepare for this unprecedented integration? And the second is, it's kind of not so different in terms of it's finding a way, talking about reintegrating the military. What can the military and VA do to support LGBTQ veterans, particularly with labeling stigma now that DAT policy has been abolished?
Certainly, I'll start with the second half because I think I've already forgotten the first half of the question, Gwen. But we have actually stood up an office within VA for that particular mission to make sure that those veterans who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender have a message heard. And there's been a lot of efforts in that. There's 2 leaders, program officers for that, and they're starting to do a lot of work. I know in my own area of responsibility that, as I mentioned earlier, when we're doing marriage and family counseling, we always make sure that there's information provided to our clinicians on how to deal with same-sex couples. We also, with our women's mental health teleconferences that occur monthly, and we usually have about 200 people calling in, as well as our MST monthly calls. Again, 200 advanced lines people call in. That has been special topics to look at. So I think this is something that the VA is very aware, and they're being very active in educating our providers to make sure that all veterans are comfortable coming in to the VA for healthcare services.
Jonathan, Sharon, and Heather Pritchard, this question is for both of you. You both suggested that nonprofit corporate partners need to work together in communities. Who is convening these efforts besides Home Depot? Which cities? And how should our charities connect with them?
We have 25 cities that the VA is actually working with right now, and I can't list them all off at the top of my head, but Lisa Pape can help you after this. So we're working closely with Community Solutions and the VA to convene organizations, and whether they're public or private, that work with veteran housing in those cities. And really what they're trying to do is end chronic homelessness among veterans in those 25 cities and create systems that actually talk to each other so we can help veterans a lot more efficiently than we have been in the past.
Yeah, you know, it's a really good question. There are collaboratives that are kind of popping up in communities and certainly in large urban areas all over the country, which provide a convening function, a forum for different stakeholders to communicate. And you know, depending on what part of the country you're talking about, I think going to identifying, you know, what collaborators are there. They in general tend to occur on academic campuses where convenings are kind of the least threatening to all the different stakeholders. It's that you can find out that type of information. We're happy to try and facilitate any information in specific areas, but I would need to know a particular community.
I have one more question. I see you standing there. And were you writing something for me? I've been known to ignore and blow right through deadlines, but I have one more really good question here. And and Kim, I'd like you to take it. Could you expand a little further on the narrative of the broken female veteran? Specifically, would you spell out what is required in order to facilitate a positive discourse on our women veterans within the public sphere?
Well, I'd like to see more examples of women in uniform before they're veterans. I did just spend almost a month in Afghanistan, and the only woman I ran across was the intelligence officer who somehow ended up with the job of directing in the helicopters at the base where I was staying. So she was literally being a traffic cop for helicopters and waiting for her billet to open up. I, as a journalist, want to talk to the people making the decisions or the people at the coalface in the field, and they're usually men. So that just sort of perpetuates out there that the examples that everyone sees back here are men doing these jobs, so they don't think of women as being in those dangerous roles. Even though you're not in, supposedly in a combat position, you're still in combat when you're in these war zones. So first of all, I'd like to see more of an acknowledgement of that. And then when they get back here, you've got to have a safe place to start the conversation and start it early so that you can confidentially bring up those issues before they become post-traumatic stress. That's, you know, I'm a woman in her late 40s from the Oprah generation. Talk early and often.
Thank you. At least we got part of the conversation started here with Dr. Susan McCutcheon of the VA, Heather Pritchard of Home Depot, Dr. Jonathan Sharon of Volunteers of America, and Kimberly Dozier of the Daily Beast. Thank you all very much. I knew I was going to do that.
Well, let's also thank Gwen Ifill, who was our amazing moderator. I want to quickly call out a few people. Our chairman of our board has come here from Detroit today, Dawn Batts, and two of our CEOs who are very entrenched in veterans issues and services, Dennis Kresak, who is a veteran. Dennis, wave your hand. And Tom Bierbaum from one of our affiliates in Massachusetts. Tom, raise your hand. Now, thank you. They are on the front lines, all of these people. But I would like for you to look at your pad and make sure to get in touch with us and go on our website, because there were so many good questions that we could not answer today. We are going to take those questions, post them, and post the answers to them, and they will be there on Monday of next week. So please look at our website for that. And I want to thank the panel and Director Eliza Basenight for their incredible stories that they told that were personal as well as professional. Now, this panel is over, but our work to raise awareness, to partner, and to find solutions to these complex and deeply entrenched issues, it's not over. In fact, there is a reignition of passion, compassion, and purpose to solve, to help, to find, to partner, and most of all, to let all of our veterans know we appreciate them in uniform and after the uniform.